Hey hockey fans, welcome to Goal Line Hockey. Today we're going to take a look at the Montreal Canadiens and their season out. As we continue the season outlook series, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe. Let's talk about the Montreal Canadiens. Alright, so starting things off, let's take a look at the points leaders for this past season for the Montreal Canadiens. And leading the list is Max Domi with 72 points. Great year for Max. 72 points is great, and he's struggled a little bit in Arizona. Got traded over the summer in the Domi Galchenyuk deal between the Coyotes and the Canadiens. Seems to be doing pretty well for the Montreal Canadiens. Second on the list, Thomas Tatar, 58 points. Let me say that again. Thomas Tatar with 58 points. Wow, what a year for Thomas Tatar. We knew he could bring it. We saw what he did with the Detroit Red Wings and how well he was able to play. And then we see Vegas take him for a pretty, what at the time people considered a pretty hefty cost. And Vegas had this kind of bad contract starting to look like it was going to bury them. And Montreal comes in. They pick up that cap hit, as well as the skill of Thomas Tatar. At the time, Bergevin took a lot of you-know-what for it, and he looks like a genius now. 58 points for Thomas Tatar, unbelievable season, and to be quite frank, he's a pretty good player, and I feel like he wasn't showcased as much in Detroit, especially during those big years. They were just so good, with guys like Datsuk and Zetterberg and Larkin coming up and Athanasiou. He kind of got, people didn't talk about him as much. Vegas paid probably the right price for him. He just couldn't produce in Vegas. But now, since coming to the Montreal Canadiens, things have really turned around for Tatar. And then we got Jonathan Drouin with 53 points. So, Drouin's interesting, as many of you remember, the Montreal Canadiens traded Mikhail Sergachev to the Tampa Bay Lightning in exchange for Jonathan Drouin. And this is tough. I think the Canadiens were really hoping that, Drouin would bring more to the table. 53 points isn't bad, but he has not been the player that people were hoping he would become. Things just haven't worked out with him in Montreal, and for whatever reason, he's in his hometown and all that, but it's just not working for him. And I think that can also be attributed a little bit to the team around him. We saw the team he played with in Tampa, how good he was able to play and how confident he was, and I feel like you're under a microscope in Montreal, and I think a lot of guys have a hard time, playing in those circumstances, and I think Drouin's one of those guys. He's been known to have attitude issues, to varying degrees in his NHL career, and it might be affecting him a little bit. Okay, so on a more positive note, Phillip Danault with 53 points, so the same amount of points, but it's a different perspective in terms of Phillip Danault, and he's really become, a great top six center for the Montreal Canadiens, and a team that kind of lacks depth right now. In the prospect pool, they definitely have guys, Nick Suzuki, Ryan Poehling, who we saw toward the end of the year, unbelievable hockey player, and Phillip Danault. So who knows what's going to happen with Danault moving forward into next season and things like that. I think he'll end up. I think he may become the first line center because Poehling and Suzuki, if Suzuki ends up playing next year, I think Poehling is kind of expected to be playing with the Canadiens, so it'll probably be Poehling and Danault, and from there, I mean they've tried, and back to Drouin. This kind of goes back to Drouin because of he was brought in to be a center for the Canadiens, and we knew for a time he struggled at center with the Tampa Bay Lightning, so they kept him on the wing, and this allows Drouin to stay on the wing. I think this having Poehling come up next year is going to help Drouin's game, whether he plays with him or not. Just for the fact that he will be able to stay on the wing, he doesn't have to worry about the center role, winning faceoffs, the battles in front and things like that. He really has struggled with that throughout his career, and I think Danault kind of helped, keep the spotlight away from a guy like Drouin. Now moving on to Brendan Gallagher, he also had 52 points, so a good season for Gallagher, and that's pretty much what you expect from Gallagher. 50 points a season, every season. A great gritty player, and he was a big part of the Canadiens' push down the stretch. They were really trying to make the playoffs, and let's get into that now. Talk about the Canadiens, how they were supposed to make the playoffs. So looking at the record, they had 44 wins, 30 losses, and 8 overtime losses. That's 96 points for the Montreal Canadiens. So not too shabby for the Montreal Canadiens. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to make the playoffs. They were 4th in the Atlantic. That's not gonna make it. And with how good the Metropolitan Division was this year, that 4th Atlantic team, it really seemed unlikely that they can make it. And we saw toward the end of the season they lost a big game in Washington. They lost to Toronto. They had some tough games down the stretch. Luckily, they were able to end the season on a good note, beating the Toronto Maple Leafs, Bob Cole's last game and all that. But man, frustrating. Really, that's the word for the Canadiens and their fans. And going through. I mean, the thing is, from where the Canadiens were last season, this is really a step in the right direction. All the talk about heads rolling there in Montreal, Bergevin maybe, his job security, not being at an all-time high and things like that. I think all those things have kind of settled, and we'll see what happens with the Canadiens next year. Can this team, with new young talent, guys like Poehling, what is the ceiling for the Montreal Canadiens? And then taking a look at the prospects for the Montreal Canadiens, we've got Nick Suzuki, who I already mentioned, Brian Poehling, who I already mentioned, Joel Teasdale, and Jesse Yelenin. So you got a couple centers there, you got a couple defensemen. So we'll see what happens with the Montreal Canadiens moving forward. And Bergevin has been known to be spotty with draft picks. He did really well with the Sergachev drafting, which became Jonathan Drouin now. But with the Canadiens, I have to say, the future looks bright for this team. If they can just keep this group together, maybe get another veteran, defenseman or a winger. I think with Shea Weber in the lineup for a full season, that would really, really be big for the Canadiens. We saw how well they played down the stretch with Shea Weber in the lineup. And people are starting to second-guess themselves about that PK Subban and Shea Weber deal. We'll see what happens in a couple years, but this year it seemed to level things out between the two in terms of that trade. So thank you guys for watching us here at Goal Line Hockey. Make sure to check out our other Season Outlook series videos, as well as playoff predictions and things like that. And the Canadiens, a tough season, but I really think this team, it's going to be tough for the Canadiens. You look at teams in their division, you look at Boston, Toronto, Tampa, those 3 teams right there should be making the playoffs. And then you add in, a team like Buffalo, who really thought they could make the playoffs this year. The Florida Panthers are going to be on the rise next year, especially with a guy like Joe Quenneville, the possibility of some big free agent acquisitions this summer. So the Montreal Canadiens have to be able to keep up with that, and it's a little bit worrying for the Montreal Canadiens, considering they made a big trade, with the Shea Weber deal, kind of putting this team in a window of, opportunity to win. Carey Price isn't getting any younger, so this team really has to figure out what they need to do to, A, make the playoffs, and B, be a legitimate contender. But we know if this Canadiens team can make the playoffs, Carey Price can at least steal you 1 or 2 games in a series, maybe steal you a round. He is just that good. So, we'll see what happens with the Canadiens. If everybody can stay healthy, the Canadiens can be a real competitive team next season. All right, everybody. Have a good day.